Quick thing before we start, this video will make a lot more sense if you understand one thing first. If you're here because you're dealing with a private parking ticket, a court claim, or a CCJ, I've written a short briefing explaining how most of these judgments actually happen and why people often misunderstand the process. You can find that at CMTM.club. Now let's take a look at why most parking CCJs were never actually decided in court and what that means in practice. Enjoy the video. Most people believe that if they receive a county court judgment, it means a judge heard the case, looked at the evidence and ruled against them. But a CCJ can have very real consequences. It can affect your credit file for 6 years. It can cause problems when applying for loans, credit cards or car finance. Some people discover it when trying to renew a mortgage or apply for rental accommodation. In certain industries, it can even raise questions during employment background checks. So when people discover a CCJ, they often assume the worst. They imagine a judge looked at the case and decided against them. But in the vast majority of private parking claims, that never actually happened. No courtroom, no hearing, no judge weighing the arguments. What happened instead was something called default judgment. And default judgment is not about who is right or wrong. It is about procedure. Understanding that difference completely changes how you see these cases, because many people don't lose parking claims in court. They lose them through silence. Let's start with the biggest misconception. Most people think civil court works like criminal court. They imagine a courtroom, a judge, arguments, evidence being examined, but civil procedure often works very differently. In many parking cases, the process looks more like this. A claim form is issued, it is considered legally served, a deadline begins, no defense is filed in time. The claimant requests judgment and the court enters it. That's it, no trial, no debate, just a procedural sequence completing itself. This is why people are often shocked when they discover a CCJ. They say things like, "I never even had my day in court." And in many cases, they are absolutely right, because the case never reached that stage. A default judgment is not a judge deciding the claimant was correct. It is the court recording that a procedural requirement wasn't met. Civil litigation runs on timetables. Once a claim is issued and deemed served, the clock starts. Usually that means 14 days to respond, or 28 days if an acknowledgement is filed. If no response arrives within that window, the claimant becomes entitled to request judgment. And when they do, the court often enters it administratively. At that stage, the court is not asking, "Is this parking charge justified?" It is asking, "Did the defendant respond within the required time?" If the answer is no, judgment may be entered. So the outcome is not driven by argument. It is driven by procedure. This brings us to one of the most misunderstood parts of civil procedure, service. Many people say, "I never received the claim form," and that may be completely true, but legally the question is not always, did the defendant see the document? The question is, was service valid under the rules? Civil procedure rules allow documents to be deemed served. That means the law can treat a claim as served even if the person never physically saw it. This can happen in situations like claims sent to an old address, claims sent to a registered address, mail that wasn't collected, or simply delays in updating records. So when someone discovers a CCJ and says, "I never received anything," that statement may be factually correct, but the legal question is different. It is about valid service, not receipt. That distinction is where many misunderstandings begin. Private parking litigation tends to follow a very specific model. These companies operate at scale, large numbers of claims, automated processes, standardized procedures. And because of that structure, many claims progress in exactly the same way. A claim is issued, a deadline begins. If no defense is filed, default judgment is requested. This is not unique to parking claims. It is simply how civil procedure works. But in parking cases, it becomes particularly visible because the claims are so numerous. The key point to understand is this. Many CCJs do not represent a courtroom defeat. They represent a procedural sequence completing itself. When someone discovers a CCJ after the fact, the instinct is usually immediate. They want to reverse it. That is where a different part of the procedural framework comes into play. Applications to set aside default judgments, but this is another area where many misunderstandings occur because the court is no longer asking the same question it asked earlier. Before judgment, the question is, was the claim defended? After judgment, the question becomes, should the judgment be disturbed? That is a different threshold. Different procedural rules apply. And many applications fail not because there was no argument, but because the procedural route wasn't properly understood. This is why understanding the mechanism matters, because once the mechanism completes, the position changes. Civil litigation is not driven by emotion. It is driven by structure, timetables, procedural compliance, rules governing service, rules governing responses, rules governing default. Once you understand those mechanisms, you start seeing these cases very differently. Instead of reacting to the outcome, you begin understanding the sequence that produced it, and that sequence is predictable because procedure always follows structure. I've written a short briefing explaining how default CCJs are actually obtained. Not the myths you see online, but the procedural mechanism itself. If you want to read that explanation, you can find it here, CMTM.club. It breaks down how default judgments arise, why many people misunderstand service, and why procedure often decides outcomes before anyone enters a courtroom. Once you understand the mechanism, you stop reacting to it and start seeing how the system actually works. If you found this explanation useful, consider liking the video and subscribing. Most of the content on this channel focuses on how the civil litigation process actually works behind the scenes, particularly in areas where procedural misunderstandings create problems for people. And if you know someone currently dealing with a private parking claim or a CCJ, sharing the video may help them understand what stage of the process they're really in.